solid understanding of what shapes their unique perspectives around test security. So I'm going to stop sharing so that you can see everyone's face. And let's go ahead and start with Nicole.
Okay. Hi, Biana. Thanks for including me. I'm extremely excited to be part of this panel. As Biana mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Statistical Reporting and Analytics at PSI. That includes things like looking at exam performance analysis, item performance analysis, things required for accreditation reporting. But what's related to today is that we have a full team of dedicated psychometricians and research scientists focused on data forensics, specifically looking at statistical analysis for test security. And we do that to support the PSI network overall, both online as well as test centers, but also we do offer it as a specific test program service as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. Bob.
Good morning, good afternoon. Happy to be here today. I'm with NCES, so we're made up, we're a nonprofit organization made up of all the licensure boards for engineers and surveying. We develop exams for those licensing boards and administer those. I've been with NCES for 19 years and seen a lot of things from a security standpoint. When I first started, I started in exam development, and then the organization realized we needed some person to help oversee and lead, exam security, and they created the position. So happy to be here today.
Thank you. Camille.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camille Thompson. I lead the test security team at College Board, which owns the SAT, advanced placement exams, CLEP, AccuPlacer, and the PSAT exam. So we're pretty firmly in the education space. And I've been working on test security matters, investigations, analysis of data. So there's data forensics that Nicole spoke about earlier. And then helping my organization decide, okay, what's next? And we'll talk a little bit about that today in our panel. Prior to joining College Board, a little bit over 5 years ago, I was part of ACT's operations and test security organizations, where I got a chance to work with Rachel Schoenig. Thanks.
All right, Corey.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Corey Clark. I lead our operational excellence team, which is really a shortened version because I lead the security, quality, training, and process improvement teams. That's all too long for a title, so we just call it operational excellence. But essentially, as Danielle mentioned, our company's focused on human first security. So really, my team oversees the training of our individuals, the execution of our procedures, which goes really nicely into our security and compliance aspects. So really anything operations adjacent is really falls in my domain. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you. And Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Rachel Schoenig. I am also delighted to be here. I am also an attorney by trade. So Camille and I, please don't hold that against us. We have worked together in the past. I've worked with several people actually on this call in the past, and it's a joy to be here with them. I am the CEO of Cornerstone Strategies. I actually started my career in litigation and then went in-house at one of my favorite clients, which was a tire retreading company, believe it or not. They have or had franchising and manufacturing facilities across the globe. So I really spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of time in my career protecting my clients' intellectual property, helping them to protect their brand reputation. And also at that time, I helped to put in place one of the first hotlines post Sarbanes-Oxley. Some of you may remember that because it was a publicly traded company. And so one of the first hotlines and engaged in the investigation of several cases that came through there as well. From there, I was recruited actually to ACT, where I had the joy of working with Camille and a lot of other really smart and dedicated people. And I led up the exam security group at ACT and was able to put some of that in international experience that I had to work, as well as some of the skill sets from just risk management and investigation to work. And so while I was there with Camille, we developed new statistical methodologies for addressing fraud, put in place some new methods for looking at surrogate testing. We also implemented a hotline there and really created more holistic response and deterrence activities across the operations at ACT. And then had the joy of founding Cornerstone with a very passionate belief in assessment and the work that we do, what a difference we can make in individuals' lives and lives of communities. And so have brought that passion to Cornerstone, feel really passionate about making certain that people can trust us within our broader ecosystem that we work within. And so we bring exam security, privacy, and executive services to support the industry. All of the folks that we work with have come from in-house, like Camille or like me. And so we really understand what it's like to be in your shoes and to help you think holistically about how to better secure your exam, secure your data privacy, and provide services in a very holistic and I guess I'll say kind of what Corey said before, very human-centric way to the industry. So building that foundation of trust is important, and I'm super excited to be here to have this conversation.
Yeah, it won't affect anything.
Can you please
Okay,
mute
no,
yourself?
I didn't get that. Like,
Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. I told you guys you're in for a treat with our wonderful panelists. So let's get into it. I guess I'll start with credentialing programs first, and I will ask you to share how have security procedures changed for your organization in the last 3 years, and then what was the turning point that caused your organization to change how you viewed security? Camille, you want to start?
Sure. So, the last 3 years have been, change upon change upon change. It's been really interesting. And so for us, we have a mixture of ways in which we deliver our exams. Some of our exams are delivered through remote proctoring. Some of our exams are delivered through in-person event-based exams that are fairly large. And during the pandemic, we had to make a number of shifts in order to either sort of put a pause on testing or to accelerate different remote proctoring offerings. And so one of the things that became really important as we were going through the pandemic, and even as we're sort of coming around the bend, is the importance of clear communication and policies for those who are involved in our assessments. And I don't just mean the test takers or the candidates. I also mean the individuals who are delivering our exams, whether those are vendors or individual test staff, as well as those who were receiving the results of our exams, so that everybody sort of understood the circumstances under which we were operating, the circumstances in which test takers were taking exams, and what those policies were, why certain rules were in place to ensure that an exam was secure. We also had to work closely with a number of our vendors, as well as with our test staff, and even with our test takers on training, just sort of here's what testing looks like during the pandemic. And so I think that those changes sort of accelerated during this time frame. Some of the changes that we've made, including our recent announcement to move to digital testing for the SAT, which is a pretty big move for us, which will begin in March of 2023 internationally. That shift has led to a lot of communication and making sure that we're evaluating our policies to fit in administration.
Bob, would you have anything to add to that?
Sure. NCS really has been changing over the last, probably 8 years. We made a decision to convert our pencil and paper exams to computer-based, and we're a very deliberate organization. So we develop over 20 different exams. Some volume as low as 50 up to over 50,000. So we, over the years, we've been transitioning. We had a plan to transition exams to computer-based. Well, once the I guess COVID happened, we speeded up that transition for our remaining exams. So that was a big factor for us. The other thing that we didn't do was go to remote proctoring. Our exams are 6 to 9.5 hours in length, and we didn't feel like the platform out there to do remote proctoring plus the security around it for a licensure exam would work for us. So instead of, I guess, going that remote proctoring route, we did some other things, like we extended authorization for candidates during the middle of COVID. So they had just across the board, we gave them more time to take it, to take their exams. And now one of the things that Camille was mentioning was some of the have clear policies for your, especially your candidates. That's really your contract with the candidates. And we are continuing to review those policies. We're hopefully now just to the point of just really refreshing or tweaking them. So, but that's one thing I'd recommend is you continually monitor your policies.
No, absolutely. And so it didn't just, changes didn't just happen on the program side, they also happened on the vendor side. Rachel, do you want to share anything, maybe some changes you guys had to implement?
Absolutely. So, we work a lot with testing programs through Cornerstone. So I'll tell you just a little bit more about what I perceived our clients were needing to look at. As you started to see people spending more time at home, you started seeing people spending more time online, more time in social media. And so I think whether testing programs had made a decision to either permanently, temporarily go online to online testing and remote testing, or to stay in test centers, like Bob was mentioning, you saw a lot more activity out there. And so I think there was a need to really think about, I talk about deter, detect, decide. There were some shifts in how testing programs operated. There were shifts in some of the risks that were sort of rearing their head in the marketplace. Telegram, for example, just different places that really rocketed up in use and were being used to really kind of cause some pain out there for testing programs. And so we really had to look and see, were there better ways to deter, detect, decide how to handle some of those risks, and think about it holistically through the life cycle. Because in addition to the administration going online, testing programs also had to wrestle with things like, workshops going online, item writing and review workshops going online, things like that. And so thinking holistically about, okay, how do we address some of these things? And then thinking holistically about, and if things happen, how do we want to respond, right? Because it's very unusual in a test center to say, have a cat run through the test center or have a toddler come in. But we need to think about what can we do to deter some of those things from happening. And then if they do happen, what are some of the responses that we need to put in place? And I think testing programs really had to kind of rethink some of those things as we saw new ways of delivering, as we saw new ways of engaging with our SMEs, and needed to really make sure that they were keeping current on their incident response plans, and then ticking and tying that back in to, if you want this response or you want this policy, you need to make sure that you've reflected that up front in your agreements. Kind of going back to what both Camille and Bob said about, communications and training, you want to make sure that your clients are really aware of those policies and understand clearly what's being expected of them if you have changes. So a lot of, reevaluating current risks, a lot of looking at current tools that were out there, and a lot of looking at good change management practices over the last 3 years. And I don't think that's going to go away, because I don't see some of these changes slowing down anytime soon.
Right.
Corey, do you want to talk about what you saw?
Sure. Yeah. So from our perspective, sophistication is kind of the word I'd go with. So sophistication in the threat actors that are stepping up. So when everyone went online, that means the valuable content went online. That means the people who are looking to make money also went online. And so we really had to step up our sophistication on the way we detect and deter and prevent. And so one of the things we did, we actually made a dedicated process security team. So we have people who worry about network and firewalls. That's a different team. This team's focused on hunting the web for these threats and forums, and traffic's out there looking for people doing, content, brain dumping kind of things. And so doing research and development. So we just had to really step up our game on preventative measures. And Daniel mentioned earlier, but even like Guardian's an example of like the output, we needed to control our own delivery method. So we had to go build that. So from us, we just had to kind of level up a little bit and help our clients level up, because all you as program owners, you don't want to spend all your nights and weekends going out there and doing all of that work. And so we wanted to do it on their behalf. So I would say that really then leads to more clear communication, as already stated. Just another persona here is test takers were kind of forced to go online. Sometimes they used to have the option. So they knew what they were signing up for and getting into, and they were a lot less agitated generally. But now when you're making that person go take that test online, they're going to find anything they can generally to be upset or to be frustrated about. So back to that clear policies, communication, expectation setting, because there's always going to be decisions, whether you're test center or online. Which do you choose, the experience of the test taker or the security? Because we could, there's a large gap potentially. We could make the person jump up and dance around and do 360 spins during the test, but obviously that's not going to be a good experience. It'd be better for security, but it wouldn't be better for experience. So as organizations, we had to consult them to where do you fall in that spectrum? How tight do you actually have to follow? If that 10-year-old runs in the room and says, "Mom, what's for dinner?" Do we really terminate the exam for that? Maybe we don't. And so versus you just had to really reevaluate your security posture without sacrificing anything, but being more human, again, context focused, because we wouldn't terminate an exam for a dog barking. No one would do that, right? So I would say sophistication on the threat side, and also more context driven on the what actually is happening side. So a little long winded, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
No, that's very helpful. I know also, Nicole, PSI has some really sophisticated investigative tools.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting to what Camille mentioned, we flagged someone for data forensics, now what? And at the test center focus, we had gotten really skilled in terms of what that now what looks like, right? We control either the equipment, or we have partnerships where we could actually go to the site where the person was taking a test. Now with the shift to online, either 100% or dual modality, this is a candidate who's testing on their own equipment in their own home, right? So if we flag them for data forensics, we don't want to stop there. We want to create a full scenario around what could have happened. Why were our data forensics indices tripped? And in addition to the lockdown browser, a lot of the things that people have already said, one of the things we kind of added on to our kind of full security suite was the ability to look at if there were any other background applications running that should not be, specifically screen sharing, things that could allow proxy testing. And that's been a very fruitful exercise in detecting, yep, this person was flagged for data forensics, and they also had this brand new screen sharing app running at the same time. But now let's take that a step further and add that new screen sharing app to our lockdown browser block list, so that, okay, maybe this first person took advantage of it being new, but we can stop anyone else from using it in the future.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's really exciting developments that you have there.
Yeah.
So when it comes to security practices, procedures, what are some things that vendors would like programs to know? And what are some things that credentialing programs would like their vendors to know? Who wants to start?
I'll go first. So open and collaborative, I mentioned earlier, kind of reevaluating, being flexible to the sophistication that's coming, I think would be one. The collaborative nature with your vendor. So us in the scenario, we don't have all the answers, nor do you. It's really kind of, you have to kind of find and bring the knowledge from both sides. And I'll say we've had some issues where clients are shifting from maybe test center only to online, and they want to copy and paste exactly how it operates, and that you just really can't typically do that. Generally you can get pretty close, but there's some nuances to that. So I would say, like, taking the experience of the vendor into consideration. Again, we don't have all the right answers, but we've been doing this for a while, so maybe there's some ways we can help kind of mitigate some threats. And also, we have some clients who want to just offload all the security responsibilities to us. That's also not really possible. I mean, for us, for example, we're delivering the exam and proctoring the exam, but if you're not also using us for psychometrics, like maybe Nicole talked about, there's some things on that, and then on test development, policy procedures. So you can't really offload all of your security hopes and dreams onto your vendor. They're a big part of it, but you can't just kind of wipe your hands and say, thankfully I'm stroking a check and they get to not worry about security anymore. That's not going to happen. But being collaborative, being understanding of what your vendor is doing and why, and that's helpful to really inform the full life cycle. So I think Rachel mentioned it earlier, but test development is a multifaceted approach. You can't just think about security when you're creating the item, or just when you're delivering the item, or just when you've got somebody who breached. You can't just think about it in those isolated sections of the process.
And I'll add on to that a little bit. Every testing program that I know of is going to be working with a vendor. So I think you need to develop that relationship with the vendor, understand what products they have to offer, and see what they have new to offer, new techniques or analysis out there that you can use. So, and then like Corey was saying, it's not just the vendor on the security side. They're going to provide you a lot of information, but once you get it, you got to decide within your organization how you want to handle that.
Yeah, and just to sort of hop on the program train, I agree with Corey and Bob on the need for collaboration, and it definitely is a two-way street. And as a program, I need my vendors to understand my timelines, the information that I need, the data access that I have to be able to prove to my internal stakeholders the decisions that we're recommending. And I think Corey's right. I'm not aware of any program that is easily offloading their security responsibilities, because ultimately it's about your brand. And even if I've contracted with multiple vendors to deliver all the different parts of my assessment, it's College Board's brand. And so we are responsible for making sure that any decisions or any security incidents are handled in a manner that's consistent with our principles and with our mission. And that's not something you can easily offload to a vendor. And it's important to keep those things, those principles and the mission in mind when you're making decisions, because the decisions that I might make for my program, where we're testing minors in educational settings, are very different than the decisions that Bob might make for his program, where he's testing adults who are training to become engineers. So there's always that importance of keeping the decisions and the work that you do from a security perspective tailored to the programs that you represent.
Rachel, Nicole, anything to add?
Nicole, I'll defer to you first.
Oh, sure. I think it's already been said, but definitely the partnership. It's a partnership. It's a partnership. On the vendor side, we have, lessons learned from across multiple test programs that we can offer. And on the test program side, your program. And so that knowing who your test security team is on the vendor side, whether it be, the test developers, the psychometricians, or their operations team, I'd say know who that team is and meet with them now. Don't wait for a security incident. Have a conversation. What happens if I find an item on the internet and I want to take it down? What does that process look like? To Camille's point, what's the timeline? It's a lot easier to manage security incidents, even small or big, if you've already known who the players are. You've already talked about it, and you kind of have some documentation on what that process looks like in terms of remediation.
Yeah, kind of having had a foot in both camps, and still kind of do. I think I would. I love what everyone has said. I think that whole piece of collaborating and building that relationship before something goes bump in the night is really important. At the end of the day, I would remind testing programs that no one is perfect. No test taker is going to be perfect. No proctor is going to be perfect. No, vendor trying to respond to some of these things are going to be perfect. So the more you can get to know your vendor, work with them on a day-to-day basis, as Nicole was saying and Camille was saying too, being in a position, and Bob used the word decision, ultimately the decision is up to you, whether you decide to cancel a score or decide to maybe cancel an administration. But your vendor is going to have a lot of data, and they're going to be able to tell you what's really technically feasible with their systems. So you really want to understand, as you're building your incident response plans, not only what you want to have happen, but how does it actually get operationalized if some of these things happen? So knowing who those people are in your vendor, organizations, in your own organizations, and having that planned ahead, as Nicole said, can just be really valuable. My advice to vendors would be that partner that the testing programs need, right? Like they need to be able to rely on you to get timely data. They need to understand what's available to you. So be responsive, be transparent, and use those day-to-day operations to build goodwill with your clients. Because if something doesn't go well, they will know that they can trust you and that they can rely on you to make it right and to work with them to get through that. And that, when everything's going well, it's fine to sort of be transactional, right? It's when things aren't going well that not having built that goodwill and not having built that reputation of trustworthiness and somebody that your client can rely on really can become sticky, and it can become really emotional. So I think a lot of those things are proactive ways that we can advance, build those relationships to get through some of those sticky times, because they'll happen. They just will.
Absolutely. So as we're talking about relationships, both Corey and Rachel, you mentioned being human-centric. So everyone, how have these security changes, concerns, or issues impacted your candidate populations?
Was that directed to me and Rachel?
Anyone?
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead, Corey.
Well, we don't actually own the candidate populations. That's why I don't want to speak for our testing programs. So if Camille or Bob maybe have opinion.
Sure. So, Baina, I can speak to, so for our testing population, again, we're testing in the education space, and for test takers who are going on towards their path to careers and to different credentials, but not quite there yet. And so for a lot of our test takers, or the test taking population has remained relatively stable. But what I would say is, they've changed the way that they interact with us over time, and I think that a lot of those things have accelerated over the last several years, due to more availability of things like digital equipment, the digital literacy that our test taking population now has in interacting on the internet and on social media. And there are different ways that we need to engage with them in order to reach them and make sure that the communications that we're sending to them are actually read and heard. I joked in other presentations, kids don't read email. They just don't. And as an organization, we've been shifting more and more to figuring out, well, okay, if our test taking population is students, and they don't read email, then what? How do we get in touch with them? And so we've been examining different channels to reach them, with a social media team who manages our social media properties and our own handles and what have you, but also in figuring out text messaging. And when you're testing hundreds of thousands of students on a given Saturday, that's no small feat to get those messages out on time and to everybody. So there's a lot, I think, that our test taking population hasn't changed necessarily, but the way that they engage with us has, and I think it'll continue to, which is kind of exciting. It helps keep me young, I guess. So I'll take it.
And from our standpoint, most of our candidates probably do read emails. So that is a good way for us to communicate. I mean, during the pandemic, our public affairs department would send out messages to candidates on a regular basis just to keep them informed. Like, yes, we know test centers are closing, but we're going to extend your authorization date so you'll have more time to test. So, and go back to your candidate agreement and make sure it's current and up to date to really what's happening in the current environment. My rule is it's easy to follow the rules. You just got to read them.
I like that.
And
Yeah.
it's a challenge, I think, with every organization to get their candidates to read and then follow the rules. So
that was going to be my joke, Bob. Like, they might read your emails, but do they read your agreement? Do they really read that agreement? One of the things I was going to say, so you had asked about this with being human centric, and I think there's a couple of things that came through the pandemic for a lot of reasons. I won't even say the pandemic, just the last 3 years. I think we have really had to acknowledge that the voice of the test taker needs to be taken into account. And I can tell you from having spoken to many psychometricians who, thought test taker, schmest taker, I don't need to worry about what those people think about it. It's all about the, it's about the numbers. It's about the way the data comes through. And I think we've heard very loud and clear that we have to be human centric, right? We need to recognize that people have different needs. People have different ways of expressing what it is they need. Kind of going back to what Camille was talking about earlier when she was saying they were starting to evaluate going online for the SAT. I mean, there's a wide range of students that would have access to different types of, equipment. Is the equipment up to date? Is it, is there enough even memory on the equipment to do some of the things that might need to happen? And so becoming more test taker centric and really understanding what test takers are facing. That doesn't mean you just like, oh, you wanted the top score, great, you got it. That's not what I mean. It's not about giving them everything they want, because what they'd really like is just the best score and then not to be able to not to have to sit for your test. Let's just be honest. But the work you do is really important. We need to make sure that we are engaging with our candidates so that they understand why some of the things that we ask them to do, like, presenting identification and, some of the other things that we require of them, is important to have a fair testing experience and to make sure that their scores are valid. So I think that would be one of the things I would say when we think about, being human centric. And some of the things that we've learned over the last 3 years is it is no longer okay to kind of ignore the voice of the customer. And Linda Adler, who was responsible for exam security at the National Board of Medical Examiners, I think said it so well when she was debating this. She said, cancel culture is real. And you don't want to, be in a situation where by ignoring what your candidates are telling you or ignoring their concerns, it starts to erode your brand. And it starts to erode the good that you're doing out there.
I'll add in quickly. So really what Camille said, the way the test takers have communicated with the clients that we serve, so testing organizations or us directly, they've a lot more orchestrated and organized. So again, I mentioned earlier that some people are thrust online, they find themselves and they say, hey, do you have a similar problem? Let's band together and make a really loud noise here. And so that's good to find weaknesses and opportunities for sure. And so I'd say that's one thing. And that really points to what Rachel was talking about, is really taking their concerns into consideration when developing your program, your policies, your procedures. And what human centric means really from our perspective is we don't have any artificial intelligence in any of our products anymore, because we don't think that it's ready to make those decisions. So again, that's our determination. So we have, when we say human proctors, we mean it. We have a human watching the test taker, and we're going to make a contextual decision on what's good and bad before we tell our clients about it. So when we're talking about human focus, that's really what we're talking about. And that those are the kind of things that test takers who are thrust into this marketplace who may not want to, they definitely generally don't want a computer making a decision solely based on their behavior. So that's really how we've changed, is dropping that from our service lines.
And Baina, I can share something that similar to Corey, we don't necessarily own the candidate population as a vendor, but I can share some things that I've seen worked really well that for test programs that we've partnered with. And one specifically as it relates to data forensics is being proactive in terms of letting the candidate population know what types of study activity or testing activity is okay and what's not. So things like, okay, yep, we know we want to help your buddy after you take the test, but it's not okay to share content that's on the test. It's not okay to, put things on the internet, even if you don't remember it verbatim. And then we had one test program who actually took a step further and said, don't search online for, test materials, right? These are the approved study guides that you should be using for our tests. I don't know if that applies to all test programs, but having clear communication in terms of things that are okay to do and things that could potentially, flag a candidate either knowingly or unknowingly by the data forensics. It kind of gives them, in terms of the fairness, in terms of it allows the candidate to know these are the expectations. And then if I deviate from these expectations, there is a chance that I could be flagged.
Right. So let's shift a little bit and talk about breaches. That's something that is a concern to a lot of vendors and testing organizations. What insight or wisdom can you provide when it comes to a security breach?
I'll start. I think your mindset needs to be not if you have a breach. You need to have a mindset of when you have a breach. Be prepared. Our organization has a exam security breach procedure, and it talks about a purpose, the purpose for the procedure, who has to follow the procedure, some definitions, reporting and reviewing irregularities, and then investigating those irregularities. Who in your organization is going to be in charge of doing the investigation? Who are your stakeholders that are going to be making the decisions of, are you going to breach some exam items or a whole exam? I remember early in my career, during a paper and pencil exam, I got that call and said, we just called a candidate videotaping the exam and recording it. And my answer was, oh, you fill in the blank with whatever words you want to use. So even though we had a procedure, it was still kind of, you get thrust into, okay, what am I supposed to be doing? So I would recommend you have a procedure, but regularly visit that procedure. Think about who's going to respond, how you're going to respond, who has certain responsibilities. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, and I would agree with Bob. It is really not a matter of if you will have a breach, but when. And it can be small in nature. It can be a large breach, and it could be a small breach that eventually turns into a large breach if it gets, sort of festers long enough. So I've had all of those occur during the course of my 11-year career, and I'm sure there will be more to come. And I think that there's no mode of delivery that absolves you of any security breaches either. The fact that we're moving to digital will have major security benefits, but I don't kid myself that I'll be hanging out at a beach drinking pina coladas while, the administrations happen and I don't have to worry about anything. I'm a warrior by heart, so I don't mind. And I think that it's important to be ready when those breaches occur. And I'd also add to what Bob said, who your security allies are or your security friends within your organization and at your vendors, to Nicole's point, and make sure that they're aware that when a breach happens, you're going to call upon them for their subject matter expertise, whether that's to tell you where data is within your scoring system, whether it's to pull video feed from your remote proctoring platform, or whether it's to send out communications to a wide swath of test staff or test takers. Those individuals will be incredibly helpful in helping you to contain your issues quickly and be able to communicate about them effectively. And I'd also note from a incident response plan, think about how you communicate about your incident internally and to leadership, but also to the external world, and arm those who have to interact with students or test takers, students in my case, test takers, test staff, and others who may use your exam results for purposes of, I heard about this incident. Well, if somebody says to me, I've heard about this incident, my response is, oh, okay, thank you for that information. I'll take it in, but to others, they may respond with what incident? And the rumor mill can start and get out of control really quickly. So I'd encourage everybody to sort of take a step back while you're not going through the throes of an incident and think about how you would communicate it. Again, consistently with the principles and mission of your organization and the way that you would want to communicate with your test takers and with your other stakeholders.
I can add early detection. Early detection is extremely, extremely important. So you want to think about, if there is something happening, how can I proactively find it? So things like tip lines, whether they be anonymous or not anonymous, things like data forensics. And then even if it's not data forensics, what statistics can I use to look, for things happening? It could be pass rates. It can be pass rates by different grouping variables like schools or geographical areas. So using what you have available now for early detection, and then looking for, new places where you may want to put things in place.
I know you have something, Rachel. I see it on your face.
Yeah, I didn't know if Corey was going to go next or not. So yeah, I would say a couple of things just to kind of circle back on that communication piece. And Camille was talking about, making sure your internal communications are clear and people know what their responsibility is. One thing that I have regularly seen in my career is that people will speculate if you don't give them clear, here's what you can say about this. So kind of to Camille's point, especially people who work on your front lines. So for particularly the testing programs, they may have people calling in to them saying, I heard about XYZ, and you want to give them confidence in how they can respond to that without necessarily giving them information that they shouldn't be divulging. And you also want to be prepared for immediate response. And it's really important at times, especially, if it's a smaller incident that arises where it's maybe just one candidate that you need to take action with, that's one thing. If it's multiple candidates or larger, or it's gone on for a long time period, you do need to anticipate that you may be contacted by media. And it becomes really important that you have one voice speaking for your organization, and you've been really thoughtful about what you want to say. You don't want to accuse someone. I know we've been talking a little bit here about cheating at times, but it's, in my opinion, not a very advisable thing to accuse someone of cheating. You can say they haven't followed the rules. You can say you have concerns about score validity, but there's a whole intent element and a judgment element when it comes to cheating that could actually result in some liability. In fact, recently there was just that case about twin sisters. Did you guys see that? We haven't had a chance to talk about it as a panel, who recently won a case claiming defamation because of an incident at their university, claiming that they had engaged in academic dishonesty. So that would be one thing I would say on the communication side. The other thing that I would say is to think about security holistically. And we kind of talked about this earlier. And I think it's really important that when you think about what can go wrong during the exam, so often we think about the administration itself. And we should also be thinking before and after. So, we talked about how some things have recently gone online for testing programs where SMEs are working online, or you've got form and item reviews happening online. And we need to be thinking about, does the camera need to be on during those times? And, if there's times, we can give some examples of incidents where bad things have happened with SMEs even who are working online. But we're stealing content before it ever got delivered. Thanks, Camille, for putting that up there. But I wanted to share another example. So some of you may remember earlier this year, one of the major accounting firms was fined $100 million by the SEC for having engaged in test fraud. It was actually on one of the ethics exams that the accountants were required to take to either receive or to maintain their CPA, which is kind of sad, right? When you're cheating on an ethics exam. And there were other issues with that particular incident as well, including the fact that they were allegedly withholding evidence from the investigators. And there's this great quote from the SEC Enforcement Division stating that the very professionals responsible for catching cheating by their clients cheated on their ethics exam. What I think is interesting is they weren't alone in that. So just a few years ago, another major accounting firm was fined $50 million by the SEC for, among other things, sharing images of the test questions. They actually had partners, accounting partners, who were soliciting questions and answers from their subordinates or their junior accountants. And then there was actually audit professionals who got in and they manipulated the internal server to lower the number of correct answers that were needed to pass. And so there were instances where audit professionals were shown to have passed that exam when they didn't even get 25% of the questions right. And those are insider concerns, right? Those are people who have insider access to your systems and to your data. And so we've been talking a lot, and I think appropriately, about the risks that happen when we deliver our exam. But I think it's important to realize that our insiders also, as much as we hate to think about it, it is, again, another important proactive thing that we can do for our testing programs, to think holistically about our testing programs, not just at the point of administration, but throughout, so that we are, really enhancing security holistically, and we're not kind of leaving some of those tail ends where things can also go wrong, that we're not thinking about those, and then we're caught flat-footed if we do need to respond to an incident. So just thought I'd share that little accounting story with you. There you go.
No, that was very insightful. Thank you. Interesting indeed. So I want to ask the membership and panelists, you can answer this question as well, but what is your greatest security concern right now? We've talked a lot about, what's happened over the past 3 years, how things have changed, but today, with where you are in your programs or as a vendor, what's your greatest security concern? Do you have anyone that wants to share and take advantage of these fine panelists that we have? All right, I don't see anyone coming off of mute. Oh.
Sure, I'll go. It's, for me, it's the candidates, the very well-intentioned candidates who are going to share questions, share items. They're finding networks. They don't mean to cheat. But they don't understand. It's conveying the importance of protecting the integrity of the exam to them.
Yeah, so being able to help them understand why the rules that they are being asked to comply with are important across the board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think, I'll just take that for just a second, then you guys jump in. I think it's exacerbated by the fact that, again, people don't read. And I like how Camille was like, our students don't read emails. And Bob's like, well, our test takers read their emails, but they don't read our contracts, darn it. And so to me, I think it underscores the fact that you can't rely on one method of explaining your rules to people, right? Like, you can't just put it in your contract and be like, hey, we told you. And you can't maybe just remind them in an email and be like, well, we reminded you. You want to think of a number of different ways that you can get those messages across and help them understand not just, what they're being asked to do, but why they're being asked to do it. And I think, that messaging piece can become really important. So I don't know, Bob or Camille or Corey.
Yeah, I'll add maybe a different flavor to that. So that's absolutely a concern, and reading, making sure they read and understand. There's also things you can do as a testing program to help mitigate those. If I talk to my buddy and said, hey, these are the kind of things that are on the test, is that a breach or not? And it's really on the test development. So am I going to get the same form as my buddy? Then maybe that's a gap that we all have and we can address. Creating items isn't cheap, and rotating those, but there are methods and tactics out there to help mitigate the, hey, number one was A. Hopefully that's not going to be a significant risk to the testing program. There's ways you can mitigate some of that.
Yeah, and I think Michael, to your point, and I think to one of the questions in the chat, sort of how do you go about this in addition to sort of multiple channels that Rachel mentioned and that Corey was talking about? It's also thinking about, are there different ways in which your message could come across? And so, for example, are there ways that you can, instead of putting it in writing or telling somebody during an exam, can you create a video and show them what it is that you don't want them to do, or that is prohibited behavior? I know Cisco a while ago had some really great videos that they shared on YouTube that were just like little snippets. They weren't long, which is important because everybody's busy, but they also just showed easy things that people could do to know what was going to happen to them, or what to expect on test day. And I think you know, a lot of us are visually oriented, and or those visual cues can be really helpful. For others who aren't visually oriented, the words are great. And so I think it's just thinking about those mixed media too, in a way that can help provide context to people. And I think, to Rachel's point, it's really important for folks to understand the why. If you just give people a set of rules and say, follow these, somebody's going to find a loophole, and not just your would-be attorneys, it's going to be everybody. So trying to explain what you're trying to accomplish with those rules can be really helpful.
Absolutely. I thought I saw a hand. I thought Paulette had a question, maybe.
Yeah, I did, but the conversation went off. Yeah, I would agree with what Michael said, but I would say not my first concern, but one thing that did come to mind was certainly our switch for our development processes and our review processes, which pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, were actually very paper heavy, and would ship out materials to our exam reviewers, and we moved to an online SharePoint access or board effect access. So it doesn't keep me up at night, but it does make me wonder, are all of those rules that we put in place for that being followed? I trust the people we work with, but there's always that little bit of doubt.
So, I think all of us want to trust our SMEs. We should trust them. Otherwise, I would question why we have them as a SME in the first place, right?
Yep.
Having said that, I know of at least one testing program who had online review. And I've also seen issues in person. So I don't want to say like this is just an online issue, but I do think we need to think differently about some of the activities that we're doing with people online. So, this is where some of your just really good practices around logging and monitoring and, what are people doing, and can they print out from there? Can they copy and paste from there, right? Just some of those really basic kind of, I'll just call it, good test security hygiene that we would want to have in place. You'd want to be thinking about. The instance that I'm thinking about, one of the SMEs was actually taking pictures and then forwarding it to a training or a school, basically. And so, as you think about item writing, items tend to come in kind of like a diamond in the rough, right? So
yeah.
Oftentimes, even if I'm taking a picture of something that I'm going to submit to you, hypothetically, it doesn't mean that it's going to come out looking like that. But I think when you go to item review, that's when, you might want to be thinking about the processes, Paulette, that you have in place. And, are you expecting people to, like, you could do it with a record and review situation, right? Like have your camera on before you get to this. I know there have been conversations that I've had with colleagues about that sort of heightened level of just observation and scrutiny, much like you would have done if someone was in person during an item writing review or workshop. You would have had your own folks in there monitoring it, kind of monitoring how people are interacting with the content online has some value and has some merit. And there's different ways you can do that. But I think you do want to trust your SMEs, and you also want to be able to, make sure that they understand the seriousness of the work they're doing. In addition to monitoring, right, there's training and there's NDAs and things like that that you can put in place for that process as well.
Yeah, thank you.
To underscore that.
I feel like we could talk about this for another hour, but we've talked a lot about breaches and things we should be doing and things we weren't doing that we wish we had done. Let's, for anyone who wants to share a final thought, leave on a positive note, and maybe tell us some things that everyone's doing right, so that people can walk away with, if I'm not doing that, at least I know I'm doing this, and I'm doing something that will, be beneficial to the security of our candidates, our exams, or anything.
I'll start by saying, attend more sessions like this or go to conferences, learn what other people are doing. A lot of times you'll walk away from those those conversations, say, oh, we're doing a pretty good job. Or you might say, here's some certain areas that we may need to work on. So that's my ending point.
I love it.
Yeah, I having security friends is a great thing. Bob's right. And being able to compare notes in whatever ways you're comfortable or your organization is comfortable is helpful. And leaning on your vendors to share their expertise and the information that they have to share about what's going on in the industry can be really helpful too. I'd also say, I think that this time of transition and constant change has also given us an opportunity to really reevaluate the security rules that are a part of our have been part of our longstanding game. And there are some rules that I know my organization has unearthed that it's like, why did we do this again? Or do we still need to do this again? But also some opportunities where it's like, we have that data, we could analyze that data. And I think there's a real opportunity to sort of go digging in your own, go shopping in your own closet and find some new tools that, or old tools that you've forgotten you'd had, or some old policies that you probably need to send over to somewhere else.
Great. No, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, panelists. I think the insight that you have shared with us today has been extremely beneficial, and we certainly appreciate you taking time to share your thoughts and knowledge with us. A few more minutes. Does anyone have any announcements that they want to share? If you do, raise your hand, throw it in the chat. I will share that CNG DC has an event on December 14th that will be in person. Check your email and check your junk mail. Some of the emails have been going to junk, so check your junk folders for that invitation. It went out yesterday. Yes, I see. Okay, yep, Michael. All right, awesome. Our next meeting for Chicago will be February 15th. It'll be posted on the CNG website. You'll also get it by email. That meeting will be virtual, but Chicago will be resuming a few in-person sessions summer of 2023. So look forward to that. I know, everyone's so excited. All right. Unless anyone has anything to share, thank you again to our speakers, our sponsors, and thanks to all of you for participating, and we will see you next time.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.